I've had threats. I mean, there are people who work with me who've been in danger, and I've had actual threats. 2019, that's when I testified before a Senate committee, and that same summer, I also did a private briefing for a bunch of AGs. Ken Paxton was there running that meeting. When I was finished, I went out in the hallway. A few minutes later, one of the AGs came out. I know exactly who it was. He's still an AG. He came up to me and he said, "Dr. Epstein, I don't want to scare you." He said, "But based on what you're telling us, I predict that you're going to be killed in some sort of accident in the next few months."
Wow.
And then he walked away. Now, obviously, I'm here and I wasn't killed in some sort of accident in the next few months, but my wife was.
What happened?
It was a terrible, terrible car accident. She lost control over a little pickup truck, and she spun out on the freeway, and she got broadsided by a semi-tractor trailer.
So sorry.
I'm sorry to hear.
But then her little pickup truck disappeared. It was never examined forensically, and it disappeared from the impound yard. And I was told it ended up somewhere in Mexico.
Well, what makes you? Is that what leads you to believe that you think there was foul play?
Well, what I believe is I will never know what happened. I had my head to her chest. I heard her last breath. I heard her last heartbeat. And I will never really know what happened. But I do know this. Afterwards, when I was starting to recover, which I really haven't really fully recovered still, but afterwards, my daughter showed me how to use Misty's phone to get all kinds of stuff. It's an Android phone. And, one thing I found on there was her whole history of movement. Every single place she had been, it tracks and it shows exactly what the addresses are and how many minutes she's at each place. Among other things, that tells me that if someone wanted to mess with her brakes or some electronics in her vehicle, they knew exactly where that vehicle was the night before.
What year was the vehicle?
I'm not sure. It was a Ford Ranger. I'm not sure of the year.
I think probably it's probably earlier than this, but I'm pretty sure like a 2012 or like what is it, earlier model. These are fully capable of being remote controlled. So a lot of the modern power steering. I was surprised to learn this. This is I think like 10 years ago. You had these very renowned cybersecurity researchers who were able to remotely hack a car and control it. And the first thing I thought was, how do you remote control? You've got to have a mechanism by which you can actually move the steering wheel without hands. I understood power steering existed, but I didn't realize that there were actual motors within the steering wheel that can move it without physical kinetic input. Sure enough, these researchers found that there was a way to remotely access through like a very narrow communication channel into the steering system. And they were able to, it's a famous video, Wired did this whole thing on it, where they're sitting in the back seat and they have a tablet or a computer or whatever, and they're making the car stop and accelerate and move all remotely. And that's when that's around the time I think most people learned that the steering systems are already electronic and automated, and digital inputs can shift this if someone can input code into the system. Now, cars today, we're well beyond that. Now, you quite literally have automatic cars, which means you get into your robo-car, the doors can lock and not open, and it can just drive itself off a cliff. The difficulty here, though, is everyone's going to ask, was it the self-driving capability that resulted in this freak accident happening? But in this time period, without getting into specifics, because they're, people's families, there are stories of individuals working on very serious foreign policy stories, going 100 miles an hour down the road and slamming into a tree and the car explodes. Without getting into specifics, there are stories related to this where the individual in question said they thought their car was tampered with and asked someone to borrow their car because they saw someone tampering with it. And then shortly after, their car, 100 plus miles an hour, slams into a tree, explodes, and the journalist dies. Everybody knows this story. So when I hear something like this, this is the scary thing about disrupting any kind of system. It's really hard to build a massive complex system. It's really easy to throw a twig into the spokes of a bike and have it flip over. You get a massive machine with millions of moving parts, and someone drops a marble into it somewhere, the whole thing explodes. You take a look at someone who's working on, saying, uncovering a massive mechanized system and understanding how fragile it may be. Oh, sorry, he got mugged. That's it. People think that assassinations and these things are always going to be some, like, a strange man was spotted coming out of a dark alley with a trench coat on, and we heard a few gunshots before the man jumped in a black van and sped off. No. Oh, remember that guy who was working on that big story? He got mugged yesterday. That's it. They caught the guy who did it. Yeah, he died. It's that simple.
It could be even softer. If you import social credit systems into the algorithms for controlling your life, your car, or your driving, you might have, just like you have suppression in your social media sites, you may have suppression in your function, your ability to spend money from your own bank,
Oh, sure.
your ability to drive your own car, right? Or shoot a gun. They might want to. I'm talking about electronically putting blockers on the ability, to use a gun. So.
Oh yeah, and there's pros and cons to this. Smart guns, where it requires a handprint sensors so that it can only be used by the individual who's programmed for it. The bigger question is it connected to the internet? In which case, people in power can bypass your restrictions. And then what you'll end up with, you as a home user, you trying to use your weapon, one day wake up to find you can't use it, but the authorities can.
I want to make a plea, and I'm going to see if you'll even let me repeat the plea, maybe at the end of this show.
Sure.
We need help building this system that we're building, which we're calling America's Digital Shield. The project is called the TechWatch Project. So if you go to techwatchproject.org, you can learn about the project. But I want to send people to one place, mygoogleresearch.com, because that summarizes everything. It's got videos, it's got links to all our scientific papers, and more importantly, it has donation links. And what we're asking people to do is to sponsor a field agent. We only pay our field agents, and in my opinion, these are heroes. I mean, we have to approach 100 people before one person will say, yes, I'll do that. You can put special software on my computer so you can monitor the content. By the way, we don't violate anyone's privacy when we do this, because their data are being transmitted to us 24 hours a day without any identifying information. Same with the data coming from their kids' devices. So we're doing the opposite of what Google does. We're only looking at aggregate data, not individual data. The point is, we only pay them $25 a month. Just like the Nielsen families, which are used to make the Nielsen ratings, they get paid very, very little money. They're doing this as a kind of public service. Our field agents, and we now have more than 12,000 in all 50 states, politically balanced, all registered voters, we only pay them $25 a month. But if you take 12,000 times 25, do the nut. What does that come out to? Anyone? I think that's $300,000 a month.
370, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about something that's very expensive, and the only way we can really make this into a permanent project is if we have tens of thousands of Americans step up. We've had in the last 2 weeks, we've had about 150 people, which is great because we haven't really been publicizing this, step up and sponsor a field agent. So if you go to mygoogleresearch.com, okay, there are donation links you can put, and it's all tax deductible, completely tax deductible, because we're a 501c3, and you click and then put in 25 and put in monthly. And as I say, we've had 150 people do this in the past week or two, but we need tens of thousands. And so there's my plea, and I'm going to try to repeat it another time. This system, in my opinion, is not optional. You have to have this kind of system in place. I just happen to be the first one to have built it, but if someone else wants to build them, that's fine. But you have to have this kind of system in place. It has to be credible. It has to be politically balanced. You have to have representative samples, et cetera, et cetera. You have to have the system in place, or you will never understand what these companies are doing to us and our kids and to our elections. You will have no clue, because what they can do invisibly and on a massive scale. The way to stop them is by shining the light on what they're doing. It's that old quote from Justice Brandeis, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. So that's the only way that I know of to stop them. No law or regulation is going to stop them because, first of all, our government's so dysfunctional. But even then, they would just go around the law. But they can't go around what we're doing because we're preserving the content that they're sending to real people.
The challenge, I suppose, is even if you get the system up and running, is Congress going to be able to get anything done? Is the Senate? These institutions are stagnant and incapable, in my opinion.
You're 100% right. That's a different problem. I do want to make sure, though, that the elections are free and fair, because at the moment, we are being controlled by a technological elite, exactly as Eisenhower warned about a gazillion years ago. He said, you have to be alert. We have not been alert. We have allowed these entities to become behemoths, and they are in control, and they are as arrogant. I know some of them personally. These are as arrogant as the most arrogant people you ever meet in your life. They are gods, and they know it.
I think Google's original expression was like, "Don't be evil."
Yeah, they got rid of that.
Yeah. In 2015, they dumped it.
Yeah.
Which basically means their new motto is be evil.
Or no, I think it's really don't be evil unless we have some reason to be evil. Like,
Well, it just means be evil. I mean, everybody thinks these people all think they're morally superior to everybody else. And the problem with this, there's a great quote. I can't remember who it was by, but it was basically, these people who think they're so much smarter than everybody else, these politicians, they're not. They're just another person who, everybody thinks that they should be in charge because they're the smart person, but that just proves they're not. I'm totally bastardizing what the quote is, but the general argument is people get power and then think I'm smarter, so I should decide what we should do. And that's basically what all tyrants, all dictators, all authoritarians tend to think. History is rife with examples of people who have destroyed the lives of so many and caused so much suffering trying to chase down that yellow brick road or whatever.
But think about that. Think about a Mussolini, a Hitler. Think about people who really have been dictators and have been in charge of a lot of people and have been trying to expand and expand and expand. Not one of them has had anywhere near the power that Google has, because Google is exerting this kind of influence, not just in the United States, but in every country in the world outside of mainland China. And of course, they've also worked on the sly with the government of mainland China to help China control its own population.
That's right. Yeah, wow.
And by the way, lefties out there, okay, because I lean left myself, so I can talk to my lefty friends that way. By the way, lefties, they don't always support the left. You go country by country, and Google does whatever it wants to do. In Cuba, they support the right.
Well, I'm curious. Right now, we're seeing an interesting phenomenon. I don't want to get into the politics of Israel-Palestine, but just considering it as a very contentious issue right now, isn't it in the interests of our government and these big tech companies, unless it's not, it tends to be to support Israel, right? To provide foreign aid to Ukraine, to Israel. We've seen tremendous bias in favor of intervention in Ukraine, but now we're seeing all of these young people. There's a viral video where they're marching down the halls of their school, chanting "From the river to the sea." So again, not to get into the politics of Israel-Palestine, my question is, how do you have such divergent political views on a contentious issue if Google controls it? Is this an area they've overlooked, or is it intentional?
That's, again, where monitoring systems are critical, because, have we looked into that? No. But could we look into it? Yes, because we're not only capturing all this information, we're archiving it. So that means you can go back in time and find out whether they were doing something deliberate. Now, deliberate is a tricky word, though. Let me just, because, deliberate means that an employee, a mischievous prankster, techie, guy made something happen, or it means there's a policy coming down from executives. That's usually what we think of as deliberate. But with Google, it works a little differently. Deliberate can also mean you leave the algorithm alone. It's called algorithmic neglect. And you let the algorithm do its thing. Now, the algorithm has no equal time rule built into it. I mean, it would be useless if it did, right?
Yeah.
It's always going to do its best to find the best and order things from best to worst. So if you just leave the algorithm alone, it's always going to take one perspective and put it at the top. And that's going to shift a lot of opinions, especially among vulnerable groups. And the most vulnerable group there is young people.